Welcome to Talking with the Translators. In this discussion, we're going to examine one important way of getting a foothold on the professional translation ladder by entering the profession through a door labelled Translation Administration. To help us find out more about this route into translation are two young translators. Dan Peachy is the assistant manager for a translation agency. Dan took his first degree in modern languages and then went on to study translation at postgraduate level. And Vasiliki Dimitrakaki works as a translation project coordinator. Vasiliki read for her first degree in her home country, Greece, and then moved to England for her postgraduate studies, firstly in translation and subsequently in business and management. Both are employed by the same company in the UK. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Can I start by asking what triggered your interest in translation?
Well, I always had a great interest in languages and I started learning English from a very young age. Then I decided to do my first degree in English language and literature at the University of Athens. And as part of my undergraduate studies, I had the chance to come across with a few translation units. And I came to realize that translation is not just mere linguistics and language use. It's mostly related to cultural transfer from a source language into a target language, and this is really fascinating. So I decided to do my postgraduate degree in translation at the University of Portsmouth.
And Dan?
I'm very similar, actually. I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be able to speak a foreign language fluently, and that led me to do a degree in French and German. In my final year there, I specialised in French translation, which was compulsory. You had to do a specialist in something. And I specialised in that and found I was actually very good at it. And that kind of led me down that path, really. But it wasn't really until I actually started work for the company I worked for that I started really seeing the variety of work available and how it all worked, and thought I can actually do this, and then went through the postgraduate system via them.
Yeah. And Vasiliki, can I ask what drew you to translation project management as a way of entering the profession?
Well, when I finished my master's in translation, I was looking, for a job that was related to translation. And I started searching for posts either as a freelancer or as an in-house translator. But then I realized that it's really difficult to find such a post because every single agency was looking for 3 to 5 years of experience, which obviously I didn't have. And I also noticed that, quite a lot of agencies were asking for translation coordinators. And at the time, I had already started my second master's in business and management, so I applied for the job in intonation. And, I hadn't thought of, this kind of post. But, it seems that there is a great need in the translation industry at the moment.
Okay. And Dan, in your case, as I understand it, you started off as a translation project coordinator and now moved on to management. Can we go back to that first stage, and can I ask you the same question? What brought you to coordination as a first?
I was slightly different, actually, in that I wasn't already qualified as a translator when I entered the profession. And I think that, for me, when I graduated, I had this plan. I wanted to get a language-related job, obviously, as everyone does, but there were so few around the area that I wanted to actually... I gave myself a deadline of 4 months to find a language-related job. It just so happened that a week before that deadline was up, a recruitment agency that I'd been signed for, and not a specialised one, happened to phone me up and say, we've got a job working for a translation company if you'd like to go for an interview. I went. I had no idea that such a post even existed, really, having not really been involved in the translation industry. Went, saw what it was all about, loved it, thought I'd be perfect for it, went for the job, got it, and moved down from there, really.
Okay. And could you tell us a little bit about what your current job is in your managerial capacity involves?
There is I still project manage on a daily basis. I think Vasiliki's going to talk about that later on. She's the best person to ask on that. But to be honest, most translation agencies are quite small companies, certainly in terms of the amount of people working there. And I think it's very important if you're in a management role to be able to be a jack of all trades, because to be honest, I cover everything. The project management side of things, I deal with the company's accounts, and although we have an external account department, there's stuff like that to do. I deal with all the company's marketing now. I also deal with the website, and that can be from writing content to go on it, to just providing directory entries, to thinking up promotional schemes, you know, the whole spectrum of marketing. Also stuff like client liaison and dealing with sales, doing client presentations, stuff like that. There's also an element of HR to it. I deal with the recruitment of the translators, also the recruitment of coordinators such as Vasiliki, for example, also their training, health and safety, all the myriad of paperwork that goes with it.
So plenty to keep you busy.
Absolutely so,
Okay.
yes.
And Vasiliki, as a translation project coordinator, can you give us an idea of what that involves?
Well, it's pretty much having to do with coordinating, controlling, monitoring a project cycle. And what we typically do is, first, the project starts with a request for a quote by the client, and then we prepare the quote where we present the price and the deadline of the translation, and we give our terms and conditions. Then, as soon as the client confirms that he wants to proceed with the translation, we search our database to find the right translator for the job. So we tend to look at things like the language pair, the rates of the translators, their field of specialization. And as soon as we find the right person, then we prepare the purchase order forms, and then the translation is pretty much in progress. And when it comes back to us, we proofread it before we send it back to the client, and then we process the payment. And we also deal with updating our databases and dealing with the client's or translators' queries.
And a little supplementary question, do you get the opportunity to translate yourself while you're coordinating these various activities?
Well, yeah, we do have some occasions that we can translate, but the thing is that in my case, the English to Greek translation is a bit rare in the UK, so I don't have huge amounts of work. And it's also a bit, the pressure on project management is really big, so we don't really have the time to deal with pure translation. That's the only issue.
Yeah, thanks.
I think, interjecting there, I think it's important to say that the amount of proofreading that goes on in project management is very important. And although it's not actual translation, it's a massive skill for a translator that would require a translator's skills.
And my impression is that's becoming more important.
Absolutely, completely, very much so.
Okay. Can we move on to skills? When we interviewed Nick Phone in our first interview, we got a pretty clear idea about the skills required of a freelance translator. Your positions are different, you know, your coordination and management functions. So what particular skills would you identify as being required for these, for this type of post?
I'd say, for me, certainly in a management kind of role, I think you need to have linguistic skills, obviously. That goes without saying. But then I think the most important skill you can have is communication skills. You've got to deal with so many people on such different levels, whether it's translators or clients. And for example, our company works with legal clients, works with engineers. They're a completely different group of people. I think time management is vital, and also the ability to sort of think on your feet and go with things. I'm sure Dan would
I guess
agree.
that more or less applies to you, Vasiliki.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with Dan, because language skills and specialization is really, really important, as well as, I would say, IT skills, because technology is really important nowadays.
And can I ask what benefits you see the role of project coordinator having in terms of your overall career development?
Well, first of all, it gives a great insight into the translation process, because freelancers usually work on their own at home, so they don't really know what's going on behind the actual project. They are just, their task just relates to the actual translation. So when you enter the profession as a coordinator, you have the chance to see all the processes, the negotiations with the clients, how to manage the whole thing. And in addition, you also have the chance of networking and experience within the industry. And as it has already been implied, you have access to a huge corpus of translations when you proofread. And there you have the chance to see how the translators have dealt with particular problems. You notice what is the terminology they use, the style, the genre, which is really important when you want to proceed with a translation.
Yeah. Okay. Dan, in your position, you're involved in the recruitment of translators. So could I ask, what does a translation agency typically look for in individuals who wish to, to get onto the database of any translation agency?
I think the first things are the obvious things, the fact that it's someone who's qualified, someone who is experienced, and someone who has good specialisms. We get so many CVs of people who say they can do any translations in tourism, music and TV, and there's so little for that out there. You need to have a real specialism, a real firm specialism in something. I'd also suggest that memberships of the various professional bodies, we take those very seriously, the ITI and the IOL, and we look at things such as your rates, stuff like that, how you'd fit in on that, and your IT skills as well. And also just a general willingness and availability. It sticks in, if you're going to help us, it sticks in our head very much. So it's definitely worth thinking about.
Can I just ask, is there a bottom line as far as experience is concerned? Do you specify X years?
I think...
Or are you flexible?
I have to say that agencies are very, very different. We, for example, as an agency, go for the kind of the top end of the market. The sort of business that we do is a lot of legal companies, stuff like that. So it has to be that they take experience very seriously, and we have a bottom line of 5 years experience. Having said that, if you have got a rarer subject area, a rarer language, then those rules are bent on occasion. Absolutely so.
Okay. Now, can I reverse this question? Yeah, you look for quality in translators. The translator approaching the agency will look for quality in the translation agency with which it wishes to work.
Absolutely.
What sort of clues would you identify that a translator would look for when approaching an agency for work?
I think it's very difficult nowadays because a few years ago I'd have said image, but it's very simple nowadays for a translation company set up in someone's front room to have a fantastic website and 4 phone lines and etc. I think the most important thing for me is to look at their membership, see what they do. Do they belong to the Association of Translation Companies, who obviously have a minimum requirement level for you to enter that? Are they corporate members of the ITI or the IOL, stuff like that again. Also look at their payment terms, see how they pay. Don't feel afraid to ask that in the first place either. It's well worth looking at various websites, which I believe we're going to come on to later, which will have discussions with other translators and will have rankings and ratings of various agencies on how well they pay, their manner, their assistance, stuff like that. Other translators will certainly be willing to tell you. It's worth looking at their client lists, who they work for, if they have those up. That's always useful. If they adhere to the European standard for translation, which is just about to come in, that's always worth looking at. And yes, in general, their manner. I think it's well worth seeing what they're like on the phone, etc. And it's definitely worth taking into account.
So talking to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Could you now take us through the mechanics of the translator registering with a translation agency?
I think it will differ for every company. I can, again, only talk for ours. I'd say the first thing to do is to check whether they are actually recruiting. Generally, most translation companies will always be recruiting because we're always on the lookout for new talent. It's worth going to the website and checking that and seeing what's available. If there's any particular requirements at the moment, for example, on our website, we have a list of things we're particularly in need of at any given time. It's then a case of submitting your CV and cover letter. And don't feel afraid then to follow that up if you don't hear anything. We get massive amounts in and it might take a while, but everything is given our attention eventually. We generally tend to ask for test pieces. Your test piece shouldn't be generally no longer than about 500 words, something like that. And it's never to be used for commercial purposes, so obviously make sure that's the case. And then from then it's just a case of getting yourself known to the agency. Think about perhaps some promotional materials, stuff like that. Think about maybe even reducing your prices initially to make yourself more attractive, to let them see how good you are, and just a case of pestering the agency until they give you a job.
Okay. Your reaction to moving from the world of academia into the professional world, were the things that you weren't prepared for that perhaps took you by surprise?
I think that's one for Vasiliki to answer. I think personally, as I didn't go the same way, I think that translators find the volume of work and sort of the expectation level quite difficult at first. An average translator will take on around 2,000 words per working day in the European languages. And having not come near that in the sort of academic situation, that's obviously quite a shock at first. I also think they're not prepared enough for specialisation. I can't stress that enough, that they come and think that they're going to be able to just do general translations when there is so little general translation work out there nowadays. It's also the hardship in finding an open door and someone willing to give you a chance, I think. I think Vasiliki would agree.
Anything to add to that?
Well, it was pretty much as I expected. I mean, I knew that all the agencies would need experience, 3 to 5 years of experience, but I was really willing to try hard, and intonation was the best opportunity, so yeah.
Okay. Now, going back to your postgraduate studies, would you say, now that you have experience of the translation world, is there anything that you think, in retrospect, that you might have done differently while you were a postgraduate student studying on a translation course?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, no, I think I wouldn't have changed anything, because during my studies I acquired all the qualifications I needed. The only issue is that I would have liked more let's say practical things, like giving the chance of job placement in, as an in-house translator, or, well, this sort of things. But, well...
Yeah. I think one of the themes that has clearly emerged from the jobs that you do is the interaction with people. Now, those sort of skills don't come easily to everyone, yeah? But they're, as we've heard, essential if you are to succeed.
It's so important to have, as you said, communication skills, because if you know how to communicate, deal with the clients, and how to manage your time and or everything that's related with management anyway, it's really important in order to succeed.
We're going to end today on technology, because IT skills have been mentioned in different contexts right the way through the whole series of interviews, let alone this one. So from, again, this perspective of yourselves as managers and coordinators, are there particular websites that you recommend to our audience, particular ones? Well,
I think firstly the three membership ones, the ITI, the IOL and the ATC, are all worth a look. They have some great job positions and definitely loads of useful information and articles as well to keep yourself abreast with the various things and the various networking events and stuff like that. The other main two that I would use are a website called prozed.com and another called translatorscafe.com. These are both very similar ideas. They're kind of sort of community sites for translators across the world. They can be really useful. They've got forums there where you can talk to other translators, you can make contacts, you can see what's going on, but also you can ask for help with terminology questions, any IT questions. Quite often there's people who are on there who are more skilled than certainly myself and that sort of thing. There's always job postings on them as well. Lots of agencies will go there looking for a translator, so that's well worth it. You can bid on jobs and things like that through there. They're extremely useful tools, and I definitely recommend going to them.
Okay, well, thanks very much. So thank you both for joining me today and talking about translation from a coordination and management perspective. Thank you both very much.